Hello, everyone. I'm Richard, and once again, I'm with Oscar and Rod. And today we are doing a commentary on the very criminally underappreciated film, The 13th Warrior.
Hello everyone, it's
Hello,
Oscar.
everyone.
It's Oscar here, and I'm looking forward to another fine commentary with you guys.
Definitely, yeah. Now, what's everyone's history with this? Because the first time I saw this was back in the year 2000, or somewhere around then, and I didn't really remember too much. But when I watched it again recently, I remembered a few things, and this time I was able to appreciate it a bit more.
As for me, I actually only discovered it a couple of weeks ago, actually. At the suggestion of Richard, of course. I'd heard of it, but I didn't really know if I really wanted to see it. But I threw caution to the wind, gave it a watch, and it is quite good. Though I do have some points to bring up as to what I liked and what I may not have liked as much. But in terms of parts that I liked, I have to say, this intro depicting Antonio Banderas' character is, well, I'd say it's a welcome addition. For just under 2 minutes, it gives us a lot of information and a lot of and sets the setting really nicely.
Yeah, I think it set it up quite nicely as well. And
That's interesting. Oh, sorry.
what's kind of interesting about this film is it had a troubled production history. It was basically a tug of war between the director John McTiernan, the studio Touchstone Pictures, and the original writer of the book, Michael Crichton, who was also an executive producer on the film.
I think he's also credited as a full producer, in addition to which.
He is, yeah.
But yeah, what was the story of McTiernan and Crichton's troubled production?
What was that? Sorry, Oscar.
What was the main thrust of the story between Crichton and McTiernan?
Well, basically, McTiernan didn't like what. Sorry, what? Sorry, did I say McTiernan or Crichton?
You said McTiernan.
Oh no, Michael Crichton basically didn't like what John McTiernan had filmed, so he didn't like what McTiernan had filmed, so he decided to do reshoots. And his basic position on it was, I have final cut. What my final word is. And actors, they'd film scenes on one set with John McTiernan, and then they'd go off to another one, and they do a completely different set of scenes under the direction of Crichton. And McTiernan wasn't always aware that was going on. And what I don't
That would make for a lot of trouble.
Yeah, what I don't understand about that is McTiernan wasn't exactly, an unsafe pair of hands. He had Die Hard, Die with a Vengeance, Predator, The Hunt for Red October, and it feels as though this is a case of the producer, the guy who, quote unquote, has final cuts, not really trusting the director, with the production, even though McTiernan was a seasoned director and knew what he was doing.
I agree. I mean, bossing a director around is really what you do to someone with little experience or little box office clout to his name. But to John McTiernan, that just seems so. Well, it's too stupid to be ballsy. That's for sure.
Well, it's interesting with McTiernan as director in this because it's sort of going against what you'd expect of him in terms of his previous work like Predator and Die Hard with a Vengeance and Hunt for Red October. But it's a case of he does quite well with this sort of genre. Like it's, adventure, fantasy, action, and that kind of thing. I think he does quite a good job with it.
And to be fair, I do have a real soft spot for this particular genre of Dark Age or period piece action films. They aren't as sophisticated as Gladiator or Kingdom of Heaven, but at the same time, there is a real appeal to them, especially in the way McTiernan creates or recreates the Dark Ages and Viking society.
I love.
Now it's interesting.
Oh, sorry, Rod. Go on.
That's all right. The music by Jerry Goldsmith. He's one of my favourite composers, and it's a shame that he passed away. But this score has a lot of elements that are very similar to The Mummy, which also came out this year. That this film came out, which was 1999, and it's not a copy of it, but you can definitely tell that there's some kind of relationship between the Middle Eastern elements of his score in this one and the ones in The Mummy. And I quite like it. You know, he does quite a good job with that sort of kind of music.
Yeah, he was very busy at this time, wasn't he? Because he was doing tons of movies, you know, in terms of scoring them. You know, he was very much in demand at this time, I think.
He was, and at the same time, I'd say the score, it definitely has its own flavour to it. It definitely it evokes that sense of that sense of Vikingness, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. One thing I like about this film is it doesn't mess around when it shows, you know, various Viking traditions, such as the funeral scene.
And I believe there's also another facet of the film that you really appreciate, Richard, and that's the fact that it is a loose but still very honourable adaptation of the Beowulf story.
I see it as more of the origins of the Beowulf story. I mean, because in the original Beowulf story, Grendel is a monster, and the way how they describe him, he's a pretty sort of like a grotesque creature, and that's almost indescribable in one way. But in this film, what they do is they turn Grendel into a war band leader of the Wendel, who are the quote unquote eaters of the dead.
I believe that was the title of Crichton's novel, Eaters of the
It
Dead.
was. Yeah, it was. And because the main protagonist is a writer, you could make the argument what he's doing is he saw all of this happen and he wrote about it, and then someone else came along and turned it into the Beowulf story that most people are familiar with.
We have here an interesting scene, I'll say the least, coming up with how they drink from this bowl.
Again, I think that was another Viking tradition where I'm not really sure what it was meant for. I think it was meant to combat germs or something.
But it also illustrates the drastically different approaches to life demonstrated by the Vikings and demonstrated by Antonio's character. Speaking of which, what do you think of the cast of characters we have in the film, Richard? There are a lot of really good actors to support them, but at the same time, do you feel that these characters have a strong enough identity on their own?
I think they do, and I basically think of them as the Dirty Dozen of the Viking world, essentially. They're all battle-hardened warriors, and I think that this was a result of the production problems. There was meant to be more of a focus on some of the supporting cast to develop them as characters, but they didn't do it, which is why some of their names, for me at the very least, are a bit hard to remember, and why when they get killed off later on, spoilers, some of these characters do get killed later on. When they get killed off, their deaths don't feel as strong as they should.
Indeed. In fact, on my first viewing, I actually kind of felt like there was something really off with the editing. The way it leaped about and the way it didn't seem to have a lot of... It didn't give the other supporting Vikings much of a strong identity.
No, it didn't, but what does save it is the fact that characters like Beowulf and Herger and Ibn, they're, the point characters. They're the ones who should get the focus. And they do get enough focus, thankfully. But yeah, I think literally just a minute, just focusing on each of these characters would have been fine. Not even a minute, just like 45 seconds. Like, oh, he's the musician. Oh, he's the fisherman. That kind of thing. That's all they needed. They didn't need to, give us their biographies or anything. Just a tiny bit of character identity would have been fine. I mean, yeah, I know that 13 characters is quite a lot, but
even more so. Even more so if you
don't
don't have the luxury of a 2.5 hour film.
Yeah, and some of them are very strong looking characters as well. I would have liked to know more about them.
It's only 100 minutes long, and this is the kind of story that really could have benefited from 2 hours. But I do, admittedly, at least a lot of the best material appears to be intact, such as when the Vikings, when the band of warriors starts to form, and many of the warriors volunteer.
There's an alternate cut of this film floating around in Hollywood somewhere, where quite a bit of footage was cut out.
Like you said, Jerry Goldsmith's score really does elevate the scene.
I love the fact that they got a seer, a Viking seer, to cast the runes.
That was a nice touch.
Now, I'm a huge fan of the TV series Vikings, and I can't help but wonder if a lot of what we see in this film inspired a lot of what we see in Vikings. I mean, for one thing, Vladimir Kulik is in this as Bullwife, and he was also in Vikings as a warrior.
Indeed, and for those gamer fans, he's also the voice of Ulfric Stormcloak in Skyrim. I recognized him primarily from his voice, and I have to say it was pretty awesome to finally make that connection.
I love Dennis Storoy as Urga. And then everybody goes quiet. And it's like, the 13th warrior man must be no dwarf man.
I like that the sense of linguistic division is still kept intact. In that in which you have the Viking characters speaking Old Norse and the Middle Eastern characters speaking English, for our convenience, of course, but it still illustrates the divide between them effectively.
That's actually something that is similar to The Hunt for Red October, where the movie, I can't remember exactly how they do it, but they stop speaking in Russian, and it's just for the audience's advantage. It's not, the characters would still be speaking in Russian, but we just hear them as English.
And we also see that Ahmed ibn Fadlan was observing the Vikings speak and learning in the process. So, really, it didn't come off as contrived as I feared it could have been.
There is sort of like a question of, how long would it actually take for someone to learn the words, but words are more than just knowing how to say the words, they're also learning what the words mean. So it's kind of like, I think that could be considered a flaw, but I don't think it's something that ruins the movie, but it makes you wonder, how would he have learnt what the actual words meant to be able to speak so fluently?
I like to think that he maybe have had an inkling of Old Norse, or being familiarity with the language to be able to start to form coherent sentences, as well as his own observations. Plus, it shows that he is an
That's true.
intelligent man.
I think this is a film where the studio didn't know what they had because they shelved it for 2 years and they kind of shoved it out in 1999, not long after Antonio Banderas did The Mask of Zorro. They wanted to capitalize on his popularity at the time, but unfortunately, it was a massive flop.
So yeah,
Kind of does have a bit of a.
Sorry, Rod.
That's right. It also has a bit of a mid-90s feel about this movie, and I didn't actually know that it had been postponed until you mentioned it, Richard. So that's quite interesting. Because when I was watching it, before I found out what year it was, I thought, this kind of feels like the movies before we got Gladiator and that, in the mid-90s sort of thing, mid to late 90s.
It very much does, and one way in which it does exceed in capturing that 90s action movie feel is the fact that it does feel very practically recreated for us.
I like the moment where it's like, how do you know our language? I listened.
Of the entire of the other 12 Viking warriors, the two that really stand out to me because I recognise them from other projects are Clive Russell and Tony Curran, as well as Vladimir Kulik as Bullywith.
What else had Tony Curran been in?
Well, we know he was the Roman centurion who was about to execute Maximus in Gladiator.
He played Vincent van Gogh in a episode of Doctor Who, and he also played King Stephen in The Pillars of the Earth.
Indeed, and one of his other major dabbles in Hollywood was as the Invisible Man in A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Ah, yes. I haven't seen that for years, but now that you mention his name, yeah.
I think he's a good underrated actor.
I think he's quite versatile as well, being able to convincingly pull off being a Viking or being an English king or Vincent van Gogh as well.
Oh, he also played the vampire William, I think it was, in the Underworld series.
Sometimes I wonder if Antonio is channeling a bit of his future Zorro self, because this was, as far as I know, this was filmed either a little bit before he was cast as Zorro, or maybe a little bit after.
I'm not really sure.
In any case, the same proficiency in horsemanship is displayed here.
Well, they say the Arabs are the best horsemen in the world.
I like in this movie how he earns the respect of everyone else.
Yeah, by showing that with his horse, size doesn't matter.
He's a little bit like this group's version of Bilbo Baggins, the underappreciated but still resourceful member of the company who isn't necessarily the strongest.
I have to say, when I look at Vladimir Kulik, I definitely see Beowulf. He just is Beowulf to me. And then when I think of other Beowulf movies, like the Robert Zemeckis motion capture film, which had Ray Winston as Beowulf, it was just like, no, hang on, no, that's just all kinds of wrong on so many levels.
Yeah, it's one of those castings which I didn't think was going to work back then. I still do not see it as a good Beowulf performance even to this day. And frankly, it's a movie that should have been made in live action, with as much adherence to the same filmmaking techniques that brought The Lord of the Rings to life as possible. After all, Beowulf is one of the stories that inspired Tolkien's love of ancient literature and creation of fantasy.
There was a moment that had passed, and I thought it was a very, it doesn't ruin the movie, but that CG shot of them on the boat in the rough seas, where it, starts in close and it zooms out, that I think that should have just been done once, because I think doing it twice, it basically makes the effect look, I don't know, not as effective to me. It's probably the only ropey bit of special effects that I've seen in the movie.
Yeah, I'd say that was a fairly ropey shot, but at the same time, it wasn't in the movie long enough for it to take me out of the experience. If anything, I'm a little more distracted by the camera work. It does seem to be in a rush to cover as much ground and as many characters as possible. I don't think it's as bad as any truly terrible cinematography work I've seen over the years, but at the same time, it does. I just wish it would slow down a little bit.
Well, I guess when you think about the behind-the-scenes trouble, I don't know if they used the same camera operator when McTiernan was directing as when Michael Crichton was directing, but, that could be one of the seams being seen.
Could well be, yes. Also, in one of the various ways this movie recreates scenes from Beowulf, we have the messenger of King Hrothgar welcoming Beowulf and his fellow warriors to the Hall of Heorot.
Now, keep an ear out for it, because I thought it was quite interesting. There's a moment in this movie, I don't know when it is, I can't remember, but you know the sound the Predator makes in Predator?
Yeah.
There's kind of a sound effect that sounds very similar to that. I think it might have been put in as a little nod.
Well, you never know. It might have been, because McTiernan obviously directed Predator.
Yeah, and if it is, I quite like that.
What do you guys think of the construction and visualization of the Viking Hall in this movie, the equivalent of Heorot?
I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I love it. The fact that they really went all out with the sets in this film.
Yeah, I think it quite does the job really well.
I think it is it's not only a magnificent building, but it's a magnificent set as well. And it does seem to invoke that feeling of ancient Norse carvings that I've seen in books and museums. still crazy to think that it wouldn't be until 2002 that people got a really good taste of what a great Mead Hall would have looked like in Edoras. It's interesting to see that this film was actually doing a pretty good job just a few years before Peter Jackson did.
Well, it's funny to think too that the work on Lord of the Rings, the movies, actually began in 1997. Obviously, the filming didn't happen till much, much later, but it's interesting to know that when this movie came out, being in 1999, it wasn't that far off the filming actually beginning.
That's true.
What do you? I can't remember the name of the actor who plays King Hrothgar in this, but I think he's quite good.
I'd say he's good, but I don't know if... But at the same time, I don't think he really captures the spirit of Hrothgar in the Beowulf poem. Hrothgar
Well, yes.
had such a venerable and noble presence to him. You could feel the years of experience as a warrior and a king.
Well, this isn't really the Beowulf poem, though, is it? This is this is how the Beowulf poem came to be.
That is true.
You could make the argument that Eben embellished on a couple of things.
That is true, and it does feel... Well, for starters, it doesn't have any of the fantastical elements in it, but it does, for the most part at least, try to give a conceivable origin for the Beowulf myth, as you mentioned. Another aspect of Predator that seems just a little familiar, you have a company of warriors in a dark, shadowy forest, and they're hunting an unseen assailant.
I never thought of it like that.
So it's kind of like what would you say, a combination of what have we got? Okay, you've got the Predator type of feel, you've got the Dirty Dozen aspect, and then what else would you say? I mean, fantasy-wise.
Perhaps a little bit of Conan the Barbarian as well. Even though McTiernan didn't direct it, it does feel very gritty and earthy in that sense, while still retaining that sense of high adventure.
Yeah, it definitely feels grounded, this film. Like, it doesn't seem to be over the top.
Yep, I heard the Predator sound effects.
Yep.
Yep.
And of course, soon we have another similarity to Predator when they find the dead bodies.
Yeah, when I knew I was in for a bit of a bit of an R-rated film, but at the same time, seeing what the Wendells did to their victims, I was like, that is gross. That is nasty.
I think that's something the studio and John McTiernan, Michael Crichton put in. Apparently, Crichton wanted to suggest more than anything else. He didn't want to 100% gross people out or make them jump or whatever. He wanted the stuff like that to be a little bit more subtle. But McTiernan said, no, we've got to have those bodies and stuff.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where if it doesn't feel as bloody and gory and as it could have otherwise been, but at the same time, I'm glad they didn't go over the top with it. Some of the costumes, not to sound nitpicky, but some of them are a bit anachronistic. For example, Bullywhip is actually wearing a 13th century breastplate and pauldron, even though this is supposed to be much, much earlier than that. I don't think it's necessarily a bad addition or a bad change from history, but so much as a stylistic departure than anything else. And even then, when you're tackling a story of the same conjunction as Beowulf, I guess departures from realism are to be expected, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a balance of people who in the audience would know their history and therefore be able to spot it, and then you've got casual movie-going audiences, and I think, not saying that it's a bad thing necessarily, but I think sometimes we forget that not everyone is knowledgeable about a lot of these things, so they might fly over their heads and not be an issue, but there's probably people out there who are really sticklers for accuracy and would probably turn the movie off at the first sight of any inaccuracy, which I think is a bit extreme and in a way a bit unfair, but it's just one of those things. Everyone has different perspectives.
Yes. We also have the next set of scenes recreating the Beowulf poem with the warriors sleeping at night and Beowulf being the one to keep a vigilant eye for the unseen assailant. I'd say it's quite subtle in the way it approaches adapting those famous passages.
It's interesting because I haven't actually read the Beowulf poem, and the only experience I've had with Beowulf is the movie that was starring Christopher Lambert, but that, of course,
it's not a good representation.
Very, no, I don't imagine it would. It's sort of more like a Mortal Kombat version.
Or a Highlander sequel, you might say.
Yeah.
That quote unquote Beowulf movie, I could only sit for a couple of minutes before I had to turn it off. It was just unbearable.
I haven't seen it, but I'll take both of your guys' word for it.
Now, what do you think about this whole Prince subplot? When I watched this movie again, I sort of thought to myself, when is it going to tie up? But he just pretty much leaves in a huff, and then he's gone for the rest of the movie.
That was one of the things that, again, the studio came in and basically added stuff in and cut stuff out. There's plenty of unseen footage, as I said earlier, of this film. There's plenty of footage of this film floating around Hollywood somewhere that's locked in a vault somewhere that we just haven't seen yet. I'd imagine in that footage, there's more. The whole Prince subplot does have a resolution.
Yeah, I wasn't at all sure what to make of it at first. In the end, I decided it was just kind of like salad dressing. It's there because it kind of looks nice and adds a bit of flavour to the story, but isn't really essential. If it was meant to go somewhere, then then it is a shame it's got cut down to what it is.
I like the speech that they have. I love how he sort of not makes fun of the prince, but sort of
puts him in his place.
Pokes him in the ribs. Exactly, yeah.
The prince kind of reminds me of Prince Joffrey from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it's like if Joffrey was given to the Starks to be their ward and he still grew up as a dick.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well.
He's not as evil as Joffrey, but at the same time, few characters in that show are.
Thank God
I quite like the actor.
Thank God the little shit's dead.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Rod. Go on.
Oh, that's all right. I quite like the actor with the eye patch, and just there's just something about his performance. Not only how he moves and as he's talking, but also how he sounds too. Adds a bit of authenticity to the time period.
Indeed. And of course it was, I think it was traditional that if a warrior suffered a nasty handicap or lost an eye, he would retire and become a skald, who is basically a Norseman bard, and recount tales from his exploits.
Vladimir Kulich too, he sort of would probably have been sort of like, he wouldn't have stuck out like a sore thumb if you put him in Die Hard as one of the, well, they're not terrorists, they're just basically robbers of Die Hard, but...
Well, I think he looks.
He
looks a bit like the big German guy who had blonde hair.
Yeah.
Which was Carl, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah, Carl, and he had a brother, and his brother had glasses, and he was also in the Timothy Dalton Bond movie. I think it was The Living Daylights.
He was.
Yeah, it was The Living Daylights. He pretended to be the milkman.
Yeah, Andrzej Wisniewski.
That's him, yeah.
What do you think of this action scene where we first meet the Wendell tribesmen?
Oh, it kind of scared me when I first saw it, because I kind of thought into my mind that they must be demons or something. Yeah. But
it is scary, and the combination of the lighting and the way the camera leaps about, it really does illustrate, it really does capture the sense of confusion and terror these warriors were probably feeling upon being ambushed. And it serves the point of contrast. They would probably not have gotten out of that scrap with Grendel as cleanly as he did. Just one way in which, even though these are veteran warriors, they're still out of their depth against a foe they've never seen before.
I like the build-up though, how they're all looking around and they're putting their hands on, ready to use their swords.
Now, when you guys first saw this scene, were you like me? Were you not really sure what to make of the Wendell?
I wasn't sure at first. I did have a feeling that they were probably not demons, but maybe some kind of insane tribe of people that just regressed into animalistic tendencies. But the movie does a good job of building them up as a demonic foe. And to men at that time, that was probably how they seemed to be. So I think it was very cleverly handled.
Yeah, and I love how brave the Vikings are. Then again, of course, they believe if they die in battle, they'll go straight to Valhalla.
We had a Mortal Kombat style fatality. One of them getting their head twisted off.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I watched this again, I remembered what I had thought when I first saw it, and at first I thought that they were monsters, and on the first viewing, when I found out that they weren't, probably that might have been one of the reasons why the movie sort of broke for me at that age. I was probably about 15, and basically it's sort of like, a bit disappointing because I expected them to be monsters. But on the second viewing, obviously that's not an issue. because I just think it fits in well with how they're dressing and all that type of stuff, and that they would think them to be monsters because of that.
I'd say so too. I didn't see it in my teens, but I probably might have felt a bit disappointed if they weren't some kind of monster. At that age, you do feel very partial towards the more fantastical side of the genre. But of course, that's not the point of the film, so I don't hold it against it.
It always makes me laugh when Eben's getting his wounds tended to, and he does nothing but complain.
I believe that's Queen Waliu, played by Diane Venora.
No, this is a different woman altogether.
Oh, sorry.
And of course, him being a Muslim, he doesn't want, cow urine as he pours it, that filth on his face. Just do it with water. But, then again, she can't. She says, tomorrow the pus will run and you'll have a fever. So sit down and have that cow urine on your face, you pussy.
But at the same time, to his credit, he does slowly acclimatize to the environment.
Well, there's that whole thing about, of course, being a Muslim, he believes in there being one God, and the Norse believe in multiple ones. So that's sort of like an aspect where the two have differences. And, I guess it's sort of like they don't really have much of an issue with each other. Like there's no need for them to be antagonistic seriously with each other. There's sort of like a bit of antagonism between the two at first, but it's not heavy drama, that kind of thing.
Well, still, what do you think of the relationship between Ahmed and the woman who sees to his wounds, and later the love interest?
Well, I thought the relationship was probably going to get more development, but again, it's probably one of those things where it doesn't, because studio interference and cutting out footage and all that.
Yeah, I feel like it was pretty underdeveloped, and but at the same time, it didn't particularly bother me. So like, if a romance really does annoy me or stick out to me, then yes, I would rather see it removed than see it developed.
I love how Eben, but I do love how Eben figures out that the broadsword's a bit too big for him, so he gets it smelted down, down to a scimitar, which is just as a deadly weapon.
But at the same time, you can make the argument that he at least has a little more familiarity with the scimitar. Yeah. And a great sword just feels too large and cumbersome in his hands.
I like when he shows it to him, and that guy's like, well, he insisted. Give an Arab a sword and he makes a knife.
Yeah, I quite liked how he does that, and it has a bit of levity to the film, but it's also funny what the response is. If when he dies, he'll give it to his daughter.
Yeah.
And that. But what I'd say about the love interest part is that I think it's serviceable, but it definitely feels as if it needed more development. I definitely agree in that respect.
If it was at all possible, would you guys want to see an extended cut of this film?
I would actually, yes. I definitely want to see what was cut out, because I do have a suspicion that a lot of the missing scenes might have added a lot more to the film.
As do I. It would have been interesting to see what they were, to see if they were, more about the prince and more about the relationship that develops between Ibn and this woman.
Yeah, much as I do respect Michael Crichton as a writer, I think his ego was all over this film.
as opposed to on other projects like Jurassic Park, where he wrote the first few drafts of the script, but the final product is not not solely to his credit.
Yeah, and that was made by Spielberg, and who's going to argue with Spielberg?
True.
And while McTiernan might not have been on the same level as Spielberg, he still had quite a few successful films under his belt.
He did, yes.
And it's like, surely his track record was enough to speak for itself, but I suppose it wasn't. Not for Michael Crichton anyway, who was like, oh no, I know better than the seasoned Hollywood director. I know better. Yes, I have final cut.
Huh.
I think it was probably more about, creative control, and he wanted to assert it over the director. And, I don't know how he felt about previous adaptations of his work, because he also had The Andromeda Strain, was also a novel he had written, and that had a film adaptation that was made. And I quite like that, actually. That's a really good one. But he, of course, had Jaws, but I can't remember what the relationship was to that film. He actually had a cameo in that. He was the news reporter with the microphone.
What do you think of this?
Sorry.
Oh, I think I was about to say what you were, Oscar, and that was, what do you think of this scene where Herger, he basically baits I think that guy's a berserker. He baits the berserker into fighting him.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to make of it, because it looked like Herger had basically brought this upon himself. But at the same time, did the berserker dude really need to be so pushy?
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't pay too much attention, you'll probably think, oh, Herger's just doing this because he can, when really he's doing it to basically send a message to the prince, which is, yes, if we can kill your best warrior, then we can kill you.
True. And it's a great way of demonstrating what Viking justice would have looked like.
Yeah, because I'm pretty certain this kind of thing would have happened. At least back then anyway.
Definitely.
I feel this sort of suffers a little bit, though, because nothing happens after this with the prince. And I guess you could say, well, that solves that subplot, because the prince, seeing this, realizes, oh shit, well, I better back off, and then that's the end of his story. But part of me can't help but feel, would there be more to this scene? Would it have more impact if it had, if it was involved with the subplot a bit more of the prince? Not saying this is bad or anything. It's quite a good scene, and as you say, it shows Viking justice and all that type of stuff. But it just feels like, it's just kept in there as part of a subplot that doesn't fully get completed.
Maybe the studio executives really did think that showing Herger defeat the Berserker was enough to wrap up that little subplot. But honestly, it feels far more like a continuation than a wrap-up.
Crichton and his ego. That's pretty much my explanation for why, why the Prince's subplot ended up being the way it was, which was, I'm pretty certain there must have been more to it. There had to have been. I refuse to believe that these are the only scenes involving the quote-unquote Viking Prince Joffrey.
Well, it's been how many years since it came out? 17?
Yeah.
It's... And no word of I think because it did so poorly at the box office and didn't become a cult classic, generally speaking, the studio has opted to sort of relegate it to the back, really.
Yeah, which is a shame, because this film, I think, deserves more credit. Because, while this is in some ways a bit of a botched cut, it's still a pretty good film.
And you have to wonder, it might have even been a great film if it was allowed to breathe and allowed to be its own film.
Yeah, basically, if Crichton hadn't thrown his weight around on the whole thing.
I don't know whether it was Crichton or maybe Touchstone Pictures, because he said the studio didn't really know what they had until pretty much it was too late.
It was a combination of both, really.
Ah,
Now the thing is too, like I can't remember, I don't know what month this came out in 1999, but in 1999 you had so many big movies, and I don't know which was closest to the release of this one, but I'll just rattle the names off. You had The Matrix, you had The Sixth Sense, you had
The Mummy.
The Mummy, you had Star Wars, Phantom Menace. You know, you had all these big films in 1999 that were coming out, and I can't help but wonder, when was this released in 1999? You know, was it close to one of those movies, or was it in sort of like a fuck you, it's January?
I think it was an August
month, or...
release, which tends to do pretty weak business.
Yeah, and the studio didn't really give it much of a marketing campaign either.
By the way, I love the scene with the warriors rallying because they see what appears to be a dragon's trail through the forest. That is very much evocative of the description of the dragon in the Beowulf poem, leaving a trail of fire as it walked. And it actually did get me pretty excited at first that we could see something more fantastical. Even if that's not necessarily what you get, the hinting of it is still pretty strong and very evocative in that sense. If there's ever a more successful and faithful adaptation of Beowulf in the future, that's a visual I would like to see brought to life.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't this set in AD 922?
I think so, yeah.
Because I'm just trying to place it with, you know, Kingdom of Heaven when that story was set.
The Kingdom of Heaven was set in the 12th century, and the story of Beowulf is implied to be around 5th or even 6th century. Even though there isn't a general consensus on when the story originated, it's implied to be while most of Europe was still in the Dark Ages and Baghdad was considered the main hub of civilization.
I love the music by Jerry Goldsmith in this scene.
It definitely does a great job of getting you pumped for battle.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of the theme for Imhotep in The Mummy.
There are similarities, but I still think it retains that northern flavour to it. While The Mummy, you really do feel, the score for The Mummy, you really do feel as though you're in ancient Egypt.
Well, you have to remember, Jerry Goldsmith was working his arse off at this time.
He was, it's true.
So I don't really mind the fact that he reused a couple of beats or themes that sound a bit similar. You know, because, you know, bless him, he wasn't
quite old.
He was quite old at this time, yeah, as well, and he was in quite high demand. Every studio wanted and director wanted him to do their music, the music for them. So I don't really have any problem with him, you know, making things easier on himself.
Well, yeah, it's not that I, you know, think he copied and pasted, but you know, it's sort of like you can definitely tell that there's a similarity between the two, and you know, it doesn't ruin the movie or anything like that. But you know, some people would mistake that for copy and pasting, but you know, it's just sounds a bit similar. It doesn't go the full extent of what the actual part from The Mummy goes in. I love that score for The Mummy.
Ooh, I love that shot of Grendel in the mist holding up his flaming torch. So to say, we're here, we're the Wendell, and we're gonna, we're the hate from old times. We're gonna eradicate the Norse from this earth.
In many ways, they probably feel they they are probably what many imagined orcs from the Lord of the Rings to be like. Just these unreasoning forces of unstoppable hatred and malice.
Yeah. I love the line from Herger, was like, where even tells him cavalry, and Herger turns around and says, I'd rather prefer a dragon. But, again, with the Vikings, they're outnumbered, but they're going to fight anyway because this, again, they think if they die, straight to Valhalla.
Indeed. Every time we see that column of riders holding their torches up, it's always so visually resplendent.
Now, one thing I've noticed is the Wendell all kind of look the same, but what they did with Grendel was they gave him those horns, and I think they gave him a sort of like a more powerful looking horse as well. He looks quite intimidating.
He's a little hard to pick up amongst the other members of the Horde, but I do like that they distinguished him from the others by giving him those horns and seemingly a much greater presence.
Now, in this scene, when you see them riding on horses, yeah, I think that's when the mystery is kind of dropped. It's like yeah, they're men. But
I do like
what's kind of interesting is like the Vikings. They're not really. They still think that they might be animals of some kind.
But it's great that we see Ibn understand that because they are men, they can be killed.
What I like about Grendel as well is we don't know anything about him, which in one way makes him a little bit more scary.
Exactly. Just as it was in the poem, the Zemeckis film made the grave mistake of trying to make him sympathetic, or giving him some kind of backstory.
Gave him a backstory where his mother, that demoness type thing, whatever she was, and who also had shagged Beowulf as well. Yeah, that film was all, as I said before, just didn't get the story of Beowulf and got it completely wrong.
Pretty much. And considering that it came from a writer I generally admire and respect, Neil Gaiman, he actually wrote the screenplay for it. It makes me even more baffled as to how they were able to just mismanage the whole thing.
So yeah, while this
bouncing physics and that were great.
Yeah. While this film has issues, that film has even more.
It just goes to show that, for some reason, Hollywood just doesn't believe in making compelling, threatening villains anymore. They always have to have some kind of backstory. Or attempt to make them sympathetic.
And I have no idea why, to be honest with you.
It's kind of like Halloween with Michael Myers. In the original film, he's more like a force of nature, a supernatural entity. And in the remake, of course, they give him much more backstory and sort of make it out that he's basically just a kid who grew up in a bad household who, was into murdering animals and all that type of stuff and, was sort of basically just left to his own devices a lot of the time. And I think it takes away some of the air of mystery to it.
And of course, that's not what Grendel is about.
No, we don't need to know anything about this Grendel anyway. He's the warrior leader of the Wendell. That's it.
And he's also supposed to be the seed of Cain, the seed of those who committed the primal sin of brother killing. In the eyes of Christians or pagans, that would still be a reason to inspire fear.
I don't know, it sort of makes you think about legends like Bigfoot and all that. It's like, you think of where it originally came from. It's sort of like, could it be that someone was just able to sort of make themselves appear to be, some creature, and then the myth just gets legs, and, then people start to think of it as a, like a legend that was true and all that kind of stuff.
Could be.
I don't know when stilts were invented, but could have been someone in stilts wearing the coat of a bear or an ape or something. I like how Abin is just like, yeah, I'm going to kill every one of them.
But even then, he still finds himself fairly out of his depth.
I like that shot when Bullwife, he points his sword at Grendel. Next time you and me are going to settle this.
Exactly.
So do they actually refer to him as Grendel in this, or?
No, they don't. But I have looked it up, and that is the name of his character. He just doesn't get referred to by name.
Okay, cool. Because I was wondering what that novel would have been like that this is based on.
I have to say, even though Antonio Banderas is Spanish, I can still buy him as a man of the Middle East in this performance, in this film.
I really think there's quite a bit of a message of tolerance in this film that shows, people of different faith can come together and work together under certain circumstances.
I'd say so as well. But more than this, it does show that tolerance between peoples and tribes is still fraught with difficulty and fraught with distrust. It's very much a give your best, and the best can be maybe given to you in return sort of affair.
Well, there's a respect between them, and I think that's a great sort of thing that is in this movie that they execute well.
I cannot taste the fermentation of grape. And then Hergus, starts laughing. It's made from honey. So yeah, you can get drunk off that.
I've never actually tried mead before. What about you, Richard? Have you ever had the chance?
No, but I wouldn't mind the opportunity to try it.
What do you think of this scene involving the elderly seer who tells Bullywhip and the others about the Wendell?
I think it's a pretty good scene, and again, I can't help but think of it as something that might have inspired Vikings, because there's quite a prominent seer character in that who tells the characters. Well, he basically kind of gives them more hints of their destiny and what's going to happen to them.
Even though it's a comedy, Eric the Viking has a seer character played by Eartha Kitt, who played, of course, Catwoman in the Batman TV show at one point. It's interesting what she says, though, because, obviously we find out that, spoilers, that it's in a cave and all that type of stuff. And the way that she explains it, it sort of makes you think, well, you know, was she explaining it that way in a mystic sense, just for mystic sense sake? Or, you know, is it really something that she believed was a mystical type of thing? Instead of just saying their leader, you know, they've got a mother leader type person. She's in a cave, go kill her. You know, that's sort of like a straightforward sort of thing. It makes me wonder,
It does,
you know, is it,
yeah. It does
you
seem
know,
a bit too straightforward, doesn't it?
a bit like me saying, you know, yes, I see there's a shop and it has things in it. You can go there and you'll find something to purchase. You
Again,
know, sort of
very
like, well,
specific.
just tell me it's in a shop.
If there was ever a Skyrim movie, I wish it would have this particular aesthetic.
And with Vladimir Kulik back again as a Viking.
And playing none other than Ulfric Stormcloak himself.
You know, again, it's one of those things where, to me, he's the best Beowulf. Even though his character's name is Beowulf, it's still pretty close to Beowulf.
It is very close. That's the thing. He has the spirit of the character, even though he doesn't have the name. So far, we haven't really. So far, we've had two other actors, Christopher Lambert and Ray Winston, who have the Beowulf name, but not the character's spirit.
No, Christopher Lambert was basically playing Conor McLeod again.
Pretty much. At least I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine so.
I don't think, to be fair, I don't think their intention was to do an honourable adaptation of it. I think they probably just saw the opportunity to turn it into like a action blockbuster type movie kind of thing. Like imagine taking Gladiator, but turning it into like a bit of a, you know, an action film type thing.
I think they also made it a post-apocalyptic sci-fi film. I can't really be sure because I haven't seen it myself.
Yeah, no, they did.
Sorry, Richard. Could you speak up?
Sorry, I was just repeating what the CSO was just done. I don't rush it then. She's, she is, not to pun, they see all.
They see everything.
You know, this film is actually quite comparable with the 2004 King Arthur film, in that it draws from familiar Western mythology, whether it's King Arthur or Beowulf, but grounds it in reality and provides a believable Dark Ages setting for it. In addition to being quite action-packed, fairly on the dark side, as was following a band of warriors who could be described as the Dirty Dozen of their time.
I wonder how this film would have done if it was released after Gladiator.
I think it would have done considerably better business, but at the same time, I think it might. But at the same time, I don't think it would have gotten much higher critical acclaim either, and might have been seen as more of a Gladiator sort of rip-off. If all of the scenes had been put back in and there wasn't so much hacking on the editing floor, it might have had a bit more of a chance. What do you think, Rod?
Well, it's hard to know really. I mean, I think if it was released after Gladiator, it would have probably done worse than what it did. Maybe it might have been better to put it not long after Braveheart came out. But then again, maybe that movie would have made this
Actually, yeah.
film worse. So I don't know. It seems like a movie that's sort of like damned if you do and damned if you don't in its form.
Pretty
You know,
much.
maybe is yeah. But if it was done, you know, as it was intended to, and it had everything put in it that was supposed to be in it, that might be a different story.
We may have to take a closer look at Braveheart at one point.
Yes. I saw it. Part of my
That'd be quite interesting one to do, I think.
Yeah, it's funny with that movie because I haven't seen it for many years. I remember when it came out though, and it was such a big deal, and everyone was like, you know, this is an awesome movie and all this sort of stuff. And it just never interested me. I don't know how I'd go about it now as an adult, but as a kid, you know, still in primary school, it didn't really have that much of an effect on me. I guess I was spoilt by movies like Commando and The Running Man and Rambo 2.
Yeah, that is possible. But at the same time, I think this sort of medieval epic was just waiting to be done in a truly great way again. And Braveheart could have obviously been that. And if it is to you, to you who are listening out there, then well, more power to you. It just has so many flaws to me that hold it back from any real greatness. Also, I have to comment on the interesting addition of there being an Earth Mother goddess for the Wendell tribe. It's pretty cool in the sense that this tribe does seem to have its own spirituality, which may come across as pretty warped and sick, but by the Vikings' standards. Overall, I'd say it was a nice addition, but at the same time, I'm still I still wish we got a little more explanation to it. But like I said, salad dressing, it's there, it looks good, and I don't think it particularly bothers me.
Yeah, I'd definitely say that this movie is sort of like, yeah, imagine if they had the footage put back in. It's certainly one of those movies, so I don't know if we'll ever see that footage put back in, and whether it's footage that is sort of scrambled anyway, so it would still require, you know, editing to put in, aside from just, copy and just paste it in.
True.
Deep enough to fall out the bottom. That's in line with their beliefs at the time that the world was flat. And that the world was flat and had a bottom.
Yeah, there's still some people who believe that too.
And that scares me.
And I very much believe we all have wings and can fly.
If I had wings, I would never use a car. I would never use a car again. What do you think? By the way, it just occurs to me. Well, it occurs to me because I remember it now. You have Beowulf and his warriors setting into a dark, waterlogged cave to kill some kind of supreme mother figure. That is essentially the killing of Grendel's mother from the Beowulf poem.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a good take on it.
It is. And it's a conceivably well realized one as well, considering the slightly more realistic slant on the myth.
again, this is all from the perspective of Eben, the writer. So Eben, I really think if this is how the origins of the story, then Eben, basically experienced all this, and then it all slowly grew into the Beowulf poem and story that most people are familiar with.
I love the way McTiernan frames these scenes in the cave. They convey such atmosphere and such unpleasantness.
The lighting is fantastic.
I know. Lighting in the cave is really hard to get right, but I think they also use a lot of natural light sources, like all of these torches.
Let's go, little brother. I don't enjoy heights.
I kind of like how he calls him little brother.
I like it too. I think it was a very subtle way of showing the Vikings growing affection towards him as a comrade in arms.
Yeah, it's definitely, about Antonio Banderas' character, Ibn, really coming into his own and proving that he is worthy to be a warrior. And, even he had his doubts earlier, of course, but it's good to see that he is able to overcome those self-doubts.
There's something always that's really unnerving about the Grendel's mother figure when she takes that vial of poison, dabs her knife in it, and just looks at Beowulf, ready to infect him with poison.
Now, what's interesting about that is John McTiernan wanted her to be, as you see the body of the mother of the Wendell on those, little statuette things.
He wanted her to be a large-breasted woman.
Yeah, pretty much, and a proper grotesque-looking thing that was almost a that wouldn't be desirable in any way, shape, or form, and he felt that was probably more in line with with the Wendell, but Michael Crichton was like, no, she should be what we see in this in her scenes with when Bull Wife kills her. And from what I understand, they did film scenes with McTiernan's vision of the mother of the Wendell, and then it would be cool to film, playing version of them.
From in your opinion, which version would you have seen? Sort of large, grotesque mother figure, or the nevertheless dangerous sort of young female priestess who stabs Beowulf?
I didn't quite catch that, sorry.
Basically, which version would you have preferred? Would you have preferred McTiernan's vision or Crichton's vision?
So I don't really know, to be honest. I think the version we get is fine, but I would have liked to have seen what McTiernan had in mind.
I think, considering that they build up the Earth Mother figure as this largish figure, I guess I can see why someone might feel disappointed. But for me personally, I think it was slightly disappointing, but not too bad. She has to be agile enough to infect Beowulf with poison and spell his doom, and she still creeps her own way with that snake wrapped around her neck. And the fact that she just stares Bullywuff down with the poison-tipped dagger.
Yeah, I think the thing too is the way that it was designed by the statue.
Yeah, he's got a massive broadsword. She had a piece of bone attached to her fingers.
And yet that still managed to be quite intimidating in its own way. I do feel as though this sequence underwater with the warriors swing to freedom, I don't know, I feel as though it sags the pace a little bit. It doesn't really feel as urgent as I hoped it could be. Maybe that's just nitpicking, but at the same time, it'd feel a little slowly paced.
Maybe they could have cut out the bit where they just see the stream running under the rock. They could have maybe just cut it so that they go straight from running to diving into the water. But getting back to the mother figure, I think in some cultures the larger bosomed and bigger women are considered to be more fertile. And the thing is, like, it's sort of, I don't know which version would have been better or not, but as you said, there's things for and against the version that we do see, and, she is a bit more agile and able to be more believable to actually stab him.
Do you think the swimming scene would have been better if it went on for a bit longer?
I don't really think so. It could maybe if the score had been a little better. It's hard to say because it does feel like such a small thing to be complaining about in an otherwise pretty solid film. But I do feel as though it didn't have the momentum of the previous scenes. Every time those horns sound, I'm reminded of the horn sound effects from Game of Thrones when the Night's Watcher and the lands beyond the wall. 1 horn blow means a ranger is coming, 2 for wildlings, and 3 for White Walkers.
I don't know. I kind of disagree with you about the swimming scene. I think it's quite well put together, and got to credit to the actors for holding their breath for that long.
That's true. They certainly gave 110% throughout this movie.
In scenes where there's people swimming, it always makes me wonder how they're able to hold their breath so damn long.
Yeah, that's true.
There's something about rain in movies which always adds so much atmosphere and suspense to them. Whether it's the raining scenes in Jurassic Park and the Lost World, or in this movie, it definitely adds quite a lot more anticipation to an action scene.
Yeah, I kind of like rain, when I see it in movies and, in conjunction with storms and things like that. It can definitely, too, in movies, help set a mood as well.
I think I read somewhere that the reason why rain doesn't appear as much in movies as it used to is because it is because it is the 3D filter that's usually imposed on a lot of blockbusters sort of takes away from the effect of the rain.
Well, that's the first I've heard of that.
Maybe something's maybe it's just misinformation. It's even though Antonius' character of Ibn doesn't feel as fully realized as he should be. Every time he says his final prayers to Allah and dons the chainmail armor, it's quite legitimately awesome. But at the same time, seeing Bullywolf in this pale and weakened state, that's pretty harrowing. Seeing that once great warrior being slowly dragged to his death by poison.
He also, shows great strength in still being able to want to fight, even though he knows that he's slowly dying.
We touched on the Viking prayer at the beginning of the film, but here is where I think it's used to the greatest effect. When at first Bullywolf says it, and then other members of the surviving warriors say it afterwards. It really does highlight that sense of unity and brotherhood between all of them. How do you guys feel about most of the action taking place in slow motion?
I thought it was an interesting choice, really. I think it is quite suitable. I mean, I don't really have any problems with it. It looks like it's a good way to do it. It's different from what you'd expect.
Indeed. And I think the fact that it allows us to see so much of the characters' expressions through it all, that's the greatest benefit. Do you think it's maybe a bit too short? After all, this is the climactic battle, and once Bullywolf kills Grendel, the rest of the Wendell tribesmen retreat. Maybe it was another case in which there was a lot more footage that was cut out to fit the 100-minute running time slot.
Yeah, I doubt we'll ever see any sort of extended thing unless there really becomes a huge wave of fans coming into knowing this movie and changing that.
I really like the way Bullywith places himself on a palisade and sits there like a king upon his throne. Since we don't actually get to see the elderly King Beowulf, I thought that was a nice way of paying tribute to that aspect of the character from the poem, while at the same time showing him as dying an honourable death, as Beowulf did.
That seems like a bit of a trailer moment.
Which part?
The bit where, Abin says forever.
Oh yeah, it definitely does in that sense.
I love the way how Bullwife he stares down Grendel when Grendel's charging at him, and then he just slices Grendel right off his horse, and Bullwife gets hit in the shoulder, and I think he gets stabbed in the back as well. But
He does get stabbed, but at the same time, he's already pretty much dying from the poison anyway.
yeah, so he's like, screw it.
But hey, you can't fault him for not putting up a great fight. Do you guys feel like maybe the climactic battle is a bit too short? Or do you believe that it's executed so strongly that it doesn't really matter how long or how short it is?
I think it's executed strongly enough, and you know what? Beowulf killed killed Grendel, and the Wendell aren't going to come back. So I love it when he stabs his sword in the ground after sitting on the palisade, and you hear the thunderclap.
That really was a trailer-worthy scene, wasn't it?
Yeah, 4 approves of this shit.
Oh yeah. I didn't really consider how much the Norse gods will probably factor into this. It's actually it's one of the great dualities of Beowulf. You have the early Danish or Norse culture, and yet you have frequent references to Christianity in it. But yeah, overall, I'd say despite its shortness, I'd say it was well executed enough, not just to hold my attention, but also to give it a reasonably satisfying conclusion.
It's interesting how he's sort of seated. It's almost like he's on his throne.
I love that shot. And even though we don't get to see Beowulf become king, the fact that he does die in a very kingly position and is subsequently given a funeral worthy of a king, I think it was a very suitable closer for the character. On the whole, The 13th Warrior is it is a film that really deserved to be longer than it ultimately was, because the material was not only strong enough to support it, but also the direction and production caliber behind it was also better than your standard 90s action movie. And yes, I do also think it is the best Beowulf adaptation we've had so far.
Well, it's either that or the Christopher Lambert movie or the Ray Winston film.
Well, this one is the only one I think that is legitimately good in its own right. There are parts that I did actually enjoy about the Robert Zemeckis film, though they are fairly small on the whole. I enjoyed the closing credits, the song, the music, some of the action scenes, but otherwise it was a it was a real miss of a film.
The bouncing physics were quite good.
Yes, the way the camera found a lot of creative ways to hide Beowulf's crown jewels. That was interesting. But yes, what would you say your closing thoughts on The 13th Warrior are, guys?
Despite its issues, it's probably my favourite Viking movie still.
And what about you, Rod?
I actually quite enjoyed it. When I watched it on the second viewing after so many years, I do actually appreciate it a lot more than I did the first time. And I think the first time I just thought of it as like a throwaway movie and nothing more to be said. But there's actually quite a lot of good moments in this, and I think that if this was sort of given a bit more attention, maybe it'd be held in higher esteem than what it is. Having said that, though, I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece of a film or anything, but I wouldn't say it's a terrible movie either. I'd say it's enjoyable, it's entertaining, and, the direction is great by John McTiernan. The music by Jerry Goldsmith is excellent, and I just think that it's definitely worth checking out.
I echo your sentiments as well. When I first saw it, I was kind of taken aback by the lack of characterization given to our band of warriors, as well as the jumpy editing and fairly fractured running time. But on second viewing, I paid a lot more attention to the stuff that I did legitimately enjoy the first time round. All of the actors are fully immersed in the role. You have McTiernan's solid action direction, pretty good production design, as well as a honourable take on the Beowulf story, while still being quite realistic at the same time. So, shall we conclude this commentary now?
Well, yeah, I don't have anything else I can really add to my summation of it, other than to say, yeah, I think it's a good movie, and I wouldn't mind there being a director's cut, which I know probably won't happen, but still, I think it's worth having one.
Yes. Here's to hoping. And here's to hoping that if there is another Beowulf movie in the future, it does take inspiration from this film, because there is a lot to admire.
Yeah, as I said earlier in the commentary, I'm not that familiar with the Beowulf story, but it's been interesting to watch this and to hear, Richard and your comments, Oscar, about Beowulf and how this is in relation to that movie.
So overall, I would say it's been a very fun time doing this commentary with you guys. I've been Oscar, and this has been awesome. Take care.
I've been Richard. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks both of you for joining with this audio commentary. It's been a lot of fun to do it with you guys, and I hope those who are listening had a good time. And this has been Rod. Adios.